Well, hello and welcome to today's session. Thank you all very much for attending. I think you're going to really enjoy today's content. If you're interested in what JBoss has been doing, specifically in the cloud and the cloud development model, platform as a service, then today's session is all for you. And so we actually have some great speakers today. Both Tobias and Scott are the key guys behind our open source cloud architecture, and I think you're going to really enjoy our content. So we've been talking a lot about App Server 7 for the last couple of months. So JBoss App Server 7 shipped back in July, and we released it with big fanfare, a whole bunch of news, and of course we did several webinars around that. Now we're talking about JBoss App Server 7 in the cloud, so that's why this slide is still here. And make sure you make note of that URL, www.jboss.org/AS7 or /OpenShift, which is today's technology, to find more information about what's going on in the JBoss AS7 world, App Server 7, or OpenShift world. One thing to note as well about this this webinar series. Our presentations and our demonstrations are really by our development team for your development team. That's our focus, making sure our key guys who are behind the scenes working on these technologies are offering you the best information they possibly can related to the use of that technology. If you go to jboss.org/webinars, you'll find our next posting there, so make sure to make note of that URL. You can also follow us on Twitter. That's @JBossDeveloper. That's the Twitter account that we'll use to broadcast new events, let you know when it's getting started, etc. We also send out an email. I know many of you guys are still registering through the email channel. There's tens of thousands of people on the email list. You should be getting an email from me that basically says, here's our next event. Please sign up, and that way we'll let you know what the URL and the password is for this WebEx session. And finally, there's Vimeo, where we will post our recordings. Often the most popular question is, where are the recordings? And we actually have all our webinar recordings out there at vimeo.com/jbossdeveloper. They're also linked from the main webinars page, but you'll also find tons of other content, other videos that we've published from JBoss World, JudCons, and other events where we have our speakers, our lead guys out there talking about their various projects and technologies. We will have their videos posted up there as well. So we have over 80 videos now listed up there, and I encourage you to go check them out. So here we are in our series. You can see there's some previous ones on here just to show that we do have a long history. We're actually at session 24 today. So we've done a ton of these over the last 18 months or so. You can see Theme, Drools, App Server 7, EE6, all about the management and administration capabilities of App Server 7. Those are all hosted and posted out there at vimeo.com. And today we're focused on platform as a service and taking JBoss AS7 and Java EE6 to the cloud with Scott and Tobias. So again, we're very lucky to have those guys today. And on September 21st, which is our next session, we're going to be talking about HTML5. So that is already posted up there at jboss.org/webinars. If you'd like to register, please do so. So one thing that we always want to make a point of whenever we do these sessions, we're very much focused on the leading, bleeding edge of technology in these sessions, where our core development team working on those open source projects in many ways are driving the community and driving standardization and bringing that information to you directly, kind of right out of the kitchens. Everything is still really hot. So that's really our community focus. We will work with a number of communities like Eclipse, and we'll work on a number of technologies and contributing to things like Glassfish, and we'll work with the Spring community and Eclipse community, the Google technology, Google community, Apache community. We'll work with all of those communities, contributing and participating as we can. All of this leads to tons of different projects that are being aggregated together and worked on. Early release often is our philosophy, so you see a ton of stuff happening all the time. These webinars just capture one moment for one project, but you will find that there are new projects and new releases of projects being born every week, it seems. So that's really where all the experimental stuff happens. And then we have the enterprise side of the house. That's really where we take all these open source projects, sit down, aggregate them together, certify them as one unit, really testing them for a set of use cases, specifically for enterprise usage, production usage kind of capabilities. And we'll certify all of that across a number of JVMs, operating systems, and databases. So that's on the enterprise side of the house, and that's not the focus necessarily of these sessions. So just keep that in mind. We always give that disclaimer. Make sure you give us some questions. So the Q&A panel right here, you can actually ask questions in real time, and please do so, because Scott and Tobias are prepared to answer your questions when they're not the one talking. So if you have a question, feel free to let it fly, and we will try to address it as quickly as we can. I'll go ahead and warn you in advance. I think today's session will run a little long. We'll probably be here for the next 60 to 70 minutes, so just be prepared for that. And today is going to be very demonstration intensive. There's not a lot of slides. It's more, let's show you what this platform as a service, specifically OpenShift with JBoss in the cloud will do. So I'm very excited to see that. I love seeing lots of demonstrations, but that does mean we're going to get a lot more content, and it's going to happen pretty fast there. So first up will be Tobias. We'll turn it over to him soon, but he is the co-founder and former CTO of Makara. He's our lead architect for OpenShift Flex. You'll know more about that in a second. And he's been our go-to guy for platform as a service here at Red Hat since coming on board last year. Scott Stark is one of the original JBoss founding fathers. So if you haven't heard that name before, then you've not really been around JBoss or in the JBoss community for very long. Scott was one of the original guys who made it happen for JBoss overall, specifically around JBoss Application Server. And he's currently the VP of Architecture and has been the guy instrumental in making App Server 7 happen for OpenShift Flex and OpenShift Express. So we're very lucky to have Scott here today to really take us through all of that in great detail as well. So we have a great lineup, and at this point, we're going to turn it over to Tobias.
Yeah, thanks for the nice intro. Hello, everybody. We'll be talking about a couple things today that relate to OpenShift in particular. A couple slides up front. First, why do we want to be on a PaaS, on a platform as a service? What is the advantage of that? That's really quick. Then a glance, 30,000-foot level glance at OpenShift. Why do we have two different, incarnations of that platform? Then Scott's going to take over, talk about JBoss AS7. What is the cool, what are the cool things about it? Why does it shine on the cloud in particular? And then we're going to get into demo mode. We figured we would split this in two different demo iterations, so very agile. First, a quick how to get started. How does it feel? What is the initial feel of that? Each incarnation here, and then later on do a deep dive, and then there's hopefully still plenty of time for Q&A. So going forward, why would you want to be on the PaaS? And our view here is really quite simple. It's all about simplicity, both for the developers and for the operations folks. So for developers, it's really about being able to focus on the application itself, on the back ends, on the front ends that you're coding up every day, and stop having to dork with a stack at all. So you've all been in the situation where you need to get something to run, and all of a sudden some Nginx or Apache or whatever configuration gets in the way, or something within Linux just doesn't work. You don't know where the config file is, and you go onto a Google Safari. That really shouldn't be your job, right? Ideally, you would just code your stuff, hand it over to a platform, and then hit the start button. So that's really what it's all about, the ease of use in a PaaS. And likewise for operations folks, or any of you who do both, right? What you should be doing in operations is really focus on the infrastructure, get the services up and running, work on your SLAs and fail-safeness, failover, these kind of things, and not deal with deployment-related issues just because some development team throws you another war file over the fence, right? So again, both sides very different. That both sides have, are about simplicity. Now, what that boils down to us, and I think a good way to think about it just in general is, and that's the last philosophy slide, I promise, is to think about this as the new Linux. If you think about Linux, a couple years back, many years back, you've been coding to kernel APIs, system calls, libraries, and various utilities. So think about those, and the operating system utilities, the yellow boxes here in the diagram. And in return for jumping through all these hoops, the operating system would shield you from the hardware specifics. There were drivers within the operating system that would talk to any particular hardware, and so you wouldn't have to do that. And it's actually quite similar today, right? What you code to as a developer today is really the open source ecosystem. broadly speaking, right? It's JBoss, clearly, as a JBoss developer. It may be, a side application that's written in Node if you're, among the, the hipsters. It may be an old-fashioned PHP application. It may be a Ruby application, whatever needs to be there. It's all, these days, it's all open source ecosystem, right? So what you expect from a solution like that would be an open PaaS that allows you to, has a platform that is equivalent to the operating system in the olden days, right? And likewise, of course, you want to be able to run this on many clouds. So you expect that also to have a number of cloud drivers. So there's comprehensive cloud management behind it. Finally, another good way to look at this is you have heard of DevOps, and I think it just sheds good light on the situation here. In the DevOps problem statement really is that developers have ideas. It's all about change. Operations, it's all about stability, opposing change. So how do we bridge that gap? And they have a very intricate framework of processes, communication, and tools that are meant to bridge that gap. Developers becoming ops people, a little bit ops people turning into developers, and so forth. We believe that the smarter answer to this problem is really to recognize that that divide, and like in the previous slide, support that division of labor with the right tools, and that would be a platform that caters to operations as well as development. And turning quickly to OpenShift, we do have two interaction models, and they are named Express and Flex. Express for getting up there very quickly. It's what I call it, a runtime as a service. You get your favorite language runtime, be it JBoss, be it Ruby, be it Python, be it Perl, right? PHP, on a shared infrastructure. So it's a simple Git-based interaction, and Scott's going to show this to you in just a second. Simple Git-based interaction, you get your application up there, you hit the start button, right? There's not a lot more control over the runtime itself. If you need more control, if you have a more complex or more composite application, then the Flex environment is the better one. It's a dedicated environment, meaning you're running in your own account. You can tie your service back into your corporate VPN if you need to. It's really middleware as a service. You get full control over each bit of your application. You can configure your message broker. You can configure AS7. You can configure your databases, whatever needs to be done. And it's optimized for existing application. You get control over nodes, over the middleware, the framework services, and you can pull in the entire software ecosystem. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Scott.
Thank you, Tobias. What I'm going to talk about today is basically what the integration model is, or what we've integrated in terms of the JBoss application server into the Flex and Express environments. The fundamental notion there is the piece that brings in a particular language or container framework is something we've termed a cartridge in the OpenShift environment. And so basically what I've done is written a cartridge that embeds the AS7 web profile into both of those environments. In addition to offering basically anything that you can run in with the web profile, a number of people have demonstrated that you can customize that to run TorqueBox and our ESB framework SwitchYard. We supported for a while the ability to run Spring applications just by bundling the Spring framework in your own application, and of course that's still supported in the AS7 cartridges. So the differences between the Express versus Flex embedding of the AS7 cartridge is fundamentally targeted toward those differences that Tobias was talking about. So with Flex, that's the full web profile with extensions to support web session clustering. In most environments, UDP is not supported, so we configure that with TCP out of the box that targets your clusters, however many nodes that you have in your cluster. And the information, the group membership, if you are familiar with how the clustering works, it's based on JGroups, but it's integrated into the actual Flex environment so that it is in control of what nodes are participants in the cluster. And that's built on top of the inherent Gluster FBAS file system that the Flex environment maintains. Express is more of a standalone single node on a box with potentially many JBoss instances running if you have many users on that box running JBoss, with a number of the elements or subsystems of the web profile disabled simply for resource constraint issues. The Express environment runs in a relatively resource constrained environment that has both SE Linux and resource limitations set, such that there's not a lot of, you don't have abundant memory and threads, so we've out of the box disabled some of the services that you typically wouldn't need for a getting started application or web application, and those are listed here: JMS, the management interfaces, web services, OSGI, the JMX connector, and remote EGBXs. So even though web services are disabled, there actually is access to JAX-RS or REST easy type of access as well. It still exists, so you still have some facility for web services, just the full web services stack is not enabled. So with that, what I'd like to do is actually show you how you can quickly get up an application running in, excuse me, in OpenShift Express. Let me start off by sharing my desktop. Okay, so the starting point here is I'm assuming that you have gone out to the OpenShift website that I'm showing here and have set up an account with Express and Flex if that's what you're going to be using. And then I've set up a number of commits here that I'm going to run through. The first one, I've already created a domain called JBoss Dev with my SS Stark RHN login. So that's going to enable me to build up to 5 applications in Express that are going to have DNS names to the form app-jbossdev.rhcloud.com. Okay. So the starting point here is I'm going to fire up a quick start application. I'm going to create it, and then I'm just going to show you how you can simply make a change, push it out, and see that change immediately. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Tobias, and then we'll come back and we'll customize that to include one of the JBoss AS7 Quick Start Kitchen Sink applications, and then I'll customize that further to show you how you can switch from the embedded hypersonic or HSQL database to a MySQL database, and talk a little bit more about what other customizations are available. Okay. So let's get started by creating the application. So the Express environment utilizes a number of Ruby command line tools. The first to create an application is called RHC create-app. The -a argument specifies the namespace of your application, so that will be the first part of your URL, and that will also be the JIT repository directory that's created locally on our box. To specify that we want a JBoss AS7 container type for the application, that we pass in -t. The password that you type in is your RHN password that you use when you set up the account on Express. So what this will do is go out on the server in the EC2 environment, which is where we're hosting this right now. We're creating a user associated with this account. We're creating a namespace that's populated with an AS7 instance. It's creating a JIT repository that's populated with a default application, and then we're registering a DNS name dynamically here at the end, and then pull down the JIT repository into our local workspaces, which you see happening now. All right, so at this point, we should have the basic getting started type or hello world, hello OpenShift application running. So let's test that out. Type in that URL that we asked to create, and this is our default entry page or default application that you see when you first create an application. It gives you some basic information about OpenShift, some information about how you use JIT, some links to sample applications, and we're going to actually go through the quick starts here later on. I'll show you how to update those, and some links to some other help and information. All right, so now the last thing I want to do is quickly make a little change to demonstrate how easy it is to modify your application. So this quick starts directory I just moved into is the JIT repository that was pulled down off of the server. So this is linked back to the Express environment in our AS7 instance. It's a Maven type source-oriented deployment of that web application. This phase, we're going to actually modify this source, push that out, and have it built on the server. So what I want to do is just make a simple change to the index page to show that we can actually visualize. Okay, now this is just a JIT repository. To force a redeployment of that content, we simply push the change. So we pushed out the change. We're now actually building it out on the EC2 server into the Maven commands running. We're restarting the server at this point, okay? So at this point, that's all been done. We should be able to reload our application up here. And we see that we have version 2 deployed. So it's that simple to get an application running and make some changes. So now I'd like to turn it over to Tobias so he can demonstrate kind of the equivalent initial steps for Flex.
Yeah, hello, welcome back. So same thing, I'm going to share my desktop here and give you hunting for the menu item. Here we go. Here we go. So same entry point. I'm already signed in. Not going to show you how you get in, an OpenShift account. So I already got one. So what do you do on the OpenShift.com side or OpenShift.com? You click on Cloud Services. In there you're going to see two different items. There's Express that Scott has been talking about, and there's Flex. And maybe a little bit hard to see all the way down here, the last item in the left side menu, that's actually the one that transports you to the Flex console. So once you click that, you get to see, it loads up the client, ironically still coded up in Adobe Flex, but being ported now. But so it loads up the client and presents you with a bunch of nice beginning tasks that you can follow. I'm not going to do this now because you can do this yourself at home. I'm just going to walk you quickly through how, what would you do if you jump into the product, have an application WAR file already, and want to get to run this in the cloud. So first thing to notice is there's a Clouds tab, right? A cloud screen. First thing you have to define is what is your cloud provider account, and this happens to be my OpenShift account. It's an EC2 account, and with a certain access key. I'm not going to show you the secret, obviously, but so you need to create that first. Once you've done that, all your code, all your data is very safely and lives in your own account. So we can't really do anything about it, right? Next thing is you create clusters, and a cluster is really a runtime environment. So you want to create, provision a set of machines that support your application or your applications. For instance, it could be your production cluster, right? So I'm going to use it, run it in a certain cloud provider's account, choose the region I want to be in. Let's just use the default US East, 32, 64-bit. Let's make this 64. How many servers you want to start with, and a couple other things, minimum cores and so forth. And then, of course, you set a password, so later on you can actually log in SSH into that runtime environment, right? You can choose whether you want to grow and shrink, so in that case you would have to use the load balancer. So I'm just, not doing this, whatever, starting it now. It's going to tell you here, this is going to take a couple minutes, look at the event screen, right? And in order to look at the progress of this. Let's do this right now. Looking at events, it's going to pull them up. You see 2 tasks here in progress, creating cluster production, 1 cloud server so far, because that's what I requested, and that start time, elapsed time so far. You see on average, if you look down a little bit, it tends to take about 2.5, 3, sometimes even 4 minutes, depending on the cloud, the state of the cloud, the cloud provider, and also, the time of the day, clearly. So just give it a little bit of time. Meanwhile, while we're waiting, I've already, created one. Oh, here you see it's being created right now. I've created a cluster that I'm going to work with now, and I'm going to use that to now onboard the application. So right now there's no application running on that cluster stage 1, so I'm going to add an application, and this should be auto-selected here. So create a new application. I'm going to call this scene booking, because that's the application word that I want to deploy. Give it version 1, and that's going to go out and create the meta files, make this application hull shell known to the system. Give it a couple seconds, and then once it's created in the system, we can actually click on it. We see it's already created a DNS name for that application. When it's running, we can hit that, right? So the next step is that we hit on the component, we hit the components tab. We declare to the system what kind of application it is, so the system can orchestrate these things for us. So this happens to be a JBoss application. We want to run AS7 and run on JDK 6. So these menus are self-selecting, and since it's uses Hibernate, we don't really need to declare a database server, so we don't have to have it. So I'm going to say save, and you see here it's saying installing required components. What that's doing is actually, depending on what you select, it's pulling in from a repository the required middleware pieces, runtimes, frameworks, and so forth. So it's very much related to a yum install, or an apt-get, or if you're familiar with Linux. Next step then is, now it's done, right? Next step, we already see 7 new files are ready to be deployed, but of course we don't have a WAR file yet. So we go to File section, say Upload File, select our scene booking WAR, and that's going to upload the WAR file. Yeah. So far we've created the hull. We've created the declarations for the middleware dependencies. They have all been pulled in, and now the WAR file gets uploaded and automatically extracted. I can even, as you'll see later on, you can even edit these things here, right? You can, there's a full-fledged editor in here, so you can look at these things. You could also configure. I'm going to go back to this in the later part of the demo. For each item, you get a wizard where you could select certain things. We don't have to do this now. And then you would go and deploy changes. Note that if you can say whether you want to deploy and start. If you have several nodes running, there would be an item that would say rolling restart, or a normal hard reset, right? These kind of things, you can try them yourself at that point. I'm going to deploy this now. This is going to take a couple of minutes, because it actually will create a new versioning system around it. So I have an application running already, just to cut out that time, and it's here under this URL here. So we pull it up, it's running, and there's the JBoss theme framework demo. Can log in, let's use Shane in Brisbane. Probably mistyped that here twice. Okay, log in. Oh, mistyped 3 times, but you get the idea. So that's the standard, one password getting in the way, the standard scene booking sample application, and now you can click around and so forth. Back to the screen here. We're going to pick up in the second part of the demo. I'm going to hand back off to Scott at this point. We're going to pick up and drill a little bit deeper in those various screens and see what we can do with this application when it's running. Okay? Thanks. Back to you, Scott.
Okay, let me. All right, now what I want to do is actually update that default application that we got pulled down into a full CDI, JPA, EE6 application, and we're going to use one of the quick starts, namely the kitchen sink application. So I have a bunch of commands here that I've already run and I'm highlighting in blue. So I basically linked to the OpenShift quick start application out in GitHub. I pulled down that content, and I've changed this from a source build deployment to a binary build deployment. And what that means is that I no longer have the pom.xml in the root of my Git repository out on the server. That's how we detect whether or not you're deploying binary content to the server's deployment directory versus actually trying to build that content. So here I've listed the updated repository. You see that we have those various quick start applications pulled in. One thing, this deployments directory here, this actually links ultimately to the server-side JBoss AS7 standalone deployments directory. So if we put binary content in that, in this case I'm going to copy a WAR file into it, and I push that out, we're basically using the hot deployment facility of the AS7 server as the means for how we're updating or managing our applications. And so actually what I want to show you is I can develop locally. I've also pulled the same Git repository into our Eclipse Rust Tools workspace. I have the AS7 server here locally. I can deploy this exact same application that I've just built to my server here. We should deploy. I can test it, access it, update it, develop locally, and then I can turn around and push that content out to the server. So at this point, we're pushing our little workspace and repository out to the server. This is going to stop and restart that server, and then we should be able to reload our web browser to see that our namespace or DNS namespace has been updated with that application. Okay, so at this point it should be available. Go back to our browser, reload. Oops, I'm sorry, I keep doing this. We've actually, I forget that we changed the context root to be the kitchen sink. It's no longer a root context. Well, all right. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty. So let's use one of the other commands. Let's check the status of the application, which is basically going to tell the server log. There is a known bug with the way that AS7 starts developments in parallel now. The server comes up so quickly that the application can be still deploying in parallel. So we query the status of the application. Let's see what the log says. Okay, it looks like we haven't deployed the application, so we probably have messed up. Yes, I forgot a command. I forgot to add the deployment to our repository. So let's do that again. That's a useful aside because often, obviously, you don't have access to the box. You need to know how to get access to your logs out there to know what's going on in that RHC status, or control app status is one way to do that. Another way is through tailing the logs. Tailing the logs gives you a little more control because you can control how many lines are coming out, and it also gives you all the logs. So if we needed, for example, to see the boot log, this is how we do that. This is going out to the server and returning all of the tail from both the boot log. Excuse me if this is not coming up well because we're scrolling through a lot of lines, but you see both the boot log and the server log. Okay. So now here we clearly see that we have the kitchen sink application deployed. Let's again try and reload our application. And yay, we have a EE6 CDI JPA application running. Let's put something in there. So we can make sure it's functional. Oops. We don't have it. So that's bean validation working for you there. You're getting all these for free tests. Right? All right, so that's all good, but now let's see some of the flexibility you have in terms of extending the server itself or controlling how your application's running. One of our useful features, let's kill the tail. One of the useful features you have is the notion of an embedded cartridges that add functionality to an application. And you saw that in the Flex screen as well, where Tobias showed that you have a number of other cartridges or components that you could add to your application. The database was one of those out there. We have the same thing in Express in a more limited form. Right now, basically, I think all we have is the MySQL database, but that's something we'll expand in the future. But what I want to do is switch from the embedded HSQL database to a MySQL database, and we do that using this RHC control app embed command. This is going to associate a MySQL instance for our application running as our user with a local URL and login, which you need to make note of, because now what we need to do is switch the server to use this data source. So to do that, there's a number of special hidden directories here in our J repository under .OpenShift. Okay. This .OpenShift config standalone.xml is actually the server configuration that's running out there in our EC2 instance. So what we want to do, and when we make changes to that and push it out there, we're actually modifying the configuration the server will use. So you have a lot of flexibility actually in controlling what the server, how it's running by editing that file. There are some limitations I'll talk about in a little bit, but for right now, let's enable that MySQL database. So we search down for, the configuration has a template for the MySQL data source. It's just disabled by default, so we're going to enable it there. You see the connection URL was updated with that information, so this is bound locally to that JBoss server instance. We need to update the password. Oh, shoot. I got to copy that again. We have to update the password to what we were told it was running as. Okay, at that point, so now if I push that out there, we'll have that data source running, but now we obviously need to update the JPA configuration of the application. So that's this little segment I have pre-composed to point to the new data source and update the Hibernate dialect. So we're switching from the default example DS to MySQL DS. Now we'll rebuild the application. update the binary war in our server deployments directory. And then we'll commit and push that change out to the server. Okay, so at this point, we're updated the server standalone.xml, enabled that MySQL database, and replaced the kitchensink.war. So we should be able to go out and see that this entry we had in the previous database should be gone, but the application should be session's gone. Now we're running against MySQL. Should be able to populate this. All right. So that's an example of some of the customization that you can do. There are a number of other things you can do. I created a little cheat sheet here in terms of what the directories are. In addition to updating the standalone.xml, where you can basically add subsystems and configure subsystems, the main restriction is that that cartridge runs and your application runs in an SE Linux environment with certain resource constraints that are constraints both memory and the number of processes or threads in the Java world that you can have running. So the main limitation you're going to have is you can't introduce subsystems that create new ports. Basically right now 8080 is the only port that's allowed to run out there. And you can't introduce very many new threads. So you can't add, for example, subsystems that are creating thread pools and that type of thing without quickly bumping into the upper limit. So that's one limitation there. One very useful thing, and on my blog, I talked about it this morning. You have the ability to extend the JBoss server class path in its module system by adding a modules directory to your .OpenShift config directory and pushing that out there. And Ben Browning of the TorqueBox team put out a blog today that illustrates how they can get TorqueBox running using basically the customizations on this slide. You know, and basically anything you put out in that config directory, for example, property files, configuration files, etc., and if you commit those are going to get pushed out into the server standalone configuration directory. Another obviously useful use case for that is to add security property files or key stores or that type of thing. Okay. You can check out my blog for additional information or extension of these various features as well. And so now I'd like to turn it back over to Tobias so he can show you basically the extensions or extended features of Flex that are comparable.
And one note there, while we turn it over to Tobias, there is a question from Klaus Scott that you might try to take on in line.
Okay.
Alrighty, thanks, Scott. Going back to the menu Safari here, sharing my desktop. So what I want to show you now, we've started the application, we've looked at the application, similar, what if I want to change something about it? And let's just look at the JBoss configuration here. I mentioned those wizards that our cartridges come with, and the idea behind it is really there is always a default configuration that should work out of the box. It clearly depends on the cartridge author. But you can also, you're free to change it. And again, the idea is expose the the handful of options that somebody may reasonably want to change on a platform and service in a graphical way with with help attached to it. But we don't restrict anything about it. So you can always you feel free to to drop down, for instance, here now to expert mode, right? Not wizard mode as before, but expert mode. And here you see you have full access to the original server XML. You can change anything you want to. Obviously, you can also break things, right? But you're going to notice that something didn't quite work out and so forth. Some items here also you see, begin busted managed. That's our private code. So stuff that you change here will also show up in the wizard, right? So as long as you keep these comments intact, then they're going to show up in the wizard. Also, again, if you change something, there's version control built in. You can always roll back to a previous version. You can always diff it with a previous version to figure out what were those changes and so forth. So pretty sweet as far as configuration is concerned. And keep in mind, whatever you do here, it happens across all machines at all times, right? So jumping back to Wizard, a couple of JDK options that you can change, garbage collection items, heap, and so forth. Full, if you want to, full access to rewrite rules in Apache, right, and so forth. So anytime you change something, you're going to see changes here. We're also picking up runtime changes. So if your application creates files or creates items in the production areas, then we're going to pick that up. You get a chance to reincorporate this to the into the application as part of the application or as part of the application's data. So next thing I want to show you is actually a different application that I've pre-created simply because it has a load balancer attached to it. Oh, sorry, wrong application. I wanted to click on that here. And it's a simple sample application. It's actually, in this case, it's a Spring application. Oh, sorry, needs to be a different context root. We seem to make the same mistakes all the time. So it's modeled after the Spring pet store. It's very lightweight. But don't want to really look at the application. Just want to show you by onboarding this and by clicking the start button, what you get on the platform in one of the eminent items here is a full, without doing anything, full performance monitoring. So you click the performance tab, and the first thing is you see here is a line of that shows you activity requests per second. Over time, this was at 7 a.m. We can zoom out. I think it's been running for quite some time. Let's zoom out. Here it actually started yesterday, shortly after noon Pacific. And you see these little markers in there, right? So anytime something changes, a deployment changes, or something gets redeployed, something happens to the cluster, somebody stopped or started the application, you're going to see these change markers, and those are fairly useful and important if you actually want to if you want to track down issues that you may have with the deployment. And I just want to, for instance, here, this cluster at that time, at around like 9:15, there was more demand on the clusters. The cluster scaled up. So you see this immediately that here, there's a marker, a new node joined. Here, a scale up event was fired, a new node joined, and so forth. So all of a sudden, we have twice that amount of traffic, right? So that's like what auto scaling gives you. Let me flip back quickly to that cluster where it's running at, because we want to show you the auto scaling. Editing the cluster properties, you flip to the auto scaling tab. I've enabled auto scaling. It's set fairly small, between 1 and 4 cloud servers. And then you choose a parameterized scaling strategy. So the way we expose scaling here is because as the application grows, has many moving parts, scaling gets very complicated. You need to have deep visibility into what happens in the platform in order to make smart scaling decisions. And since we monitor everything, we actually can do a fair amount of smart decision making there, right? So we expose this as strategies, and that list is going to grow. But right now, there's CPU utilization, requests per node, and a mixture of these things. I just simply base this on CPU utilization. So if the CPU is greater than 30%, I just made this so that it scales up and down quickly. It's actually a it's a constant load generator that's attached to this application for demo purposes. You can also change, like export, import your database that is managed on a platform. The database format, you can export in different formats. Actually, we don't have a database attached to this, I think. Yeah, as a MySQL dump, or you can select this as a SQL file and then export it, import the same thing. You can fetch it or you can upload it on file, so both work. This is really to see your database. Also, if you want to send email, if you've ever tried this on a cloud environment, you'll notice that most cloud providers' net blocks are really blacklisted as spam, because a lot of email emanates from there, gets sent, that is commercial email. So what you can do is first enable it, then set something that add a relay. Then every mail function on that system will automatically use your corporate email relay, for instance, right? So that's useful for a lot of application types, and we cancel out of that. Another tab that's interesting is here. For some operations people prefer to have a per server view of what are you running, and this is actually here you see 4 nodes belonging to 4 clusters, right? Because the auto cluster here actually scaled down again. You get a quick rundown of what's happening. Here we had some clicks on the stage 2 cluster, which hosts the scene booking application that we looked at. You also have a bunch of continuous activity on the, and you just see it's auto updating, continuous activity on the auto tracking application. You can mouse over these things and find out what happened. What's the memory state, what's the CPU state. Interestingly, here, for instance, you also see that Amazon is actually stealing away like 83 megahertz from our CPU right now, right? The steal number that you see here, that's like CPU cycles that have, the virtual machine never sees, and so forth. So you can always see if there's any node, redlined. You can filter these guys clearly, down to a number of clusters that you care about, any which way you want to do that. So flipping back to the cluster here, there are a couple. First you can mix and match these things. You can scale them up a little if you need more detail. There's also some have controls. There's a legend attached to it. Here, for instance, primary headline. Here, you can get a legend of what these colors mean. You can also rearrange them as I just showed it to you. So this guy here is your transaction histogram, and if we just zoom in for a little bit, we're going to see that within this time window here, between 9:15 and 9:25, roughly 10 minutes, right? Most, like 50% of my transactions were fairly quick, but I had a really sizable number of outliers here. So my 95 percentile is really at 4 seconds at that point. So that's something I would have to look at and during this interval. I can always move back to a different time, and I see this is actually fairly consistent. So this is a performance characteristic of this application in this runtime right now. So I may be running out of memory, and I can examine these things further. Another nice thing is, let me just pull this up here and compare this with activity. Actually make this large. Here's something, what we call tags. So every HTTP transaction that comes in is tagged in a number of ways automatically. You can also add tagging yourself. It's tagged by the URL, by the method, by the result code, and by the host that's being hit. And we see several hosts being hit for this application, and on average they're all they're sorted by slowest transaction. And we see that the owner.do URL, for instance, on average is the slowest one. And then we have a lot of 500 requests here, right? In this window, right, we actually have 28 of these 500 results. So it's definitely something to look into. Again, you can always pop up the legend. You can mix and match graphs according to your need. and more graphs being added. Now, another really nifty feature is, often you think, what does that mean? What do these numbers mean? Is 2 seconds, is that good? Is 1 second good for this application historically, right? And so the features that we filled in, that we can do since we keep, infinite history, what we can do is we can pop up a second window to look at. Now, comparing the time frame 9 to 9:10 roughly to the time frame around 9:15, starting at 9:15, and I see, well, initially I only had like that much disk space, now I have twice that, right? Or looking at the CPU resources that I have, actually used much less now, but proportion is the same. I see both windows here in the SLA graph. They actually have the same shape, so nothing changed before and after the scale up, which was to be expected, right? Nothing on the slow transactions really changed significantly. The activity pattern is roughly the same. I was a little bit more starved on the memory side here. There was nothing really left here, whereas here I have more free memory. And since I scaled up. So this is helpful in pinning down certain performance problems. Now, want to go on and flip to the logging view, which is very similar. You see the same activity bar on the top. You can slide it around depending on how many log messages you have. That fetching may take a little time, but to be expected. Now, what this really is across all nodes in the cluster, across all components that carry the application, like the load balancer, web server, application tier, the application code itself, and so forth, we collect and consolidate and merge all the log messages. So you can look at them in a time-sorted fashion. So here you see this is a message from the web server, this is a message from the application server. Here it's an error message, Spring Framework. This is entirely searchable, by the way. So you can search for something like, let's say, owner, and it's free text search within that time frame. And now you see only those. So, for instance, searching for a certain URL that was hit, ART owner, owner.do, right? Then it's going to filter only for these messages, right? And clearly you can move these things around. You can, here there's no comparison between log messages, but you can customize the layout here a little bit. Apply, for instance, you want to see which server actually gave me this, this all happened from the same server at this point, excuse me, and so forth. So that should show you that it's a very easy UI-driven interaction with your environment. You are in charge of all your runtime environments across all clouds. I just happen to only have one cloud account here, but if you run one on Amazon, another one on IBM or any Red Hat certified cloud provider that's coming onto the platform, then you have a single pane of glass here that you can look at. There's cloud management, there's your operational view here, your application views, you can pivot between those views, and basically tossed in for free, you get deep performance monitoring and log management. And with that, I think it's time to turn to questions.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much for that demonstration. We do have some questions. One specifically, I think, Tobias, you can address. And that's from Nicholas here. If you see it in the Q&A panel, it's related to what he sees in Flex. He believes is possibly more than what he's seen in CloudWatch, which I'm not sure what CloudWatch is, honestly. And he's wondering if it's similar to CloudFormation or some other orchestration solution.
Yes, absolutely. So, in two parts to that, right? Yes, CloudWatch is an external monitor. It's like, a lot of HTTP monitors. It observes, it pings certain ports in a 5-minute interval or something like that. Flex has monitoring built in as a first-class citizen. So it's built on the basis of monitoring. So the system, while you're running, monitors every single component in a very finely grained interval. So we actually also manage, monitor method execution although that's not being displayed now. It's only for health detection. So yes, it does significantly more, and it's coming from within every single machine. It's built into the platform, if you will. It's something similar to CloudFormation. Yes, it's a different paradigm. Think of it as, inversion of control. As you're running your application in our system, you can always export your running application, and that's a specific package. When you think back when we set up the application shell, the hull, the meta information, declare dependencies on that, and all that, that is essentially captured, serialized in a text file, in a series of text files that gets exported with the application. Now, you can take it and import it into any other cloud that's running Flex, right? So as you import it, it will pull in all the middleware and orchestrate everything. So this is our equivalent to CloudFormation. Now, it's not as flexible. In CloudFormation, you can create your own servers, and that's something that we will follow up with OpenShift Power. But of course, you also lose ease of use. On a platform as a service, that platform is always necessarily geared towards a very specific class of applications. In our case, it's a generic web application. And yes, we do full orchestration of parts as part of the application package. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. And we can wait for another follow-up question if there is one. Another question that I think you could also address, because and again, since we're dealing with Flex and Express, sometimes these things are set up differently. So basically the question is, how are data sources and JMS destinations configured and handled? I think that's specifically what they're looking for. And in the case of Flex, how you pointed out some of that in the UI console, I believe.
Yeah, that's probably something that Scott can answer better as it pertains to AS7.
And Scott just popped up an answer there. Scott, are you still on the line, verbally speaking, orally?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's another question that's come in. Suppose my company manages its own data center. Is it possible to prep it so that OpenShift can be used to deploy an application and ops can administer via OpenShift? So this is, I guess, a private scenario or a hybrid scenario where they have their own data center. And so that question has come up before. What is the use of OpenShift in my own data center?
So this ties into the question about being open source. And maybe you can step back one step, and clearly Red Hat is an open source company. Everything within Red Hat is eventually open source. Now, this piece, Flex in particular, much of it came through an acquisition. It's in the process of being open sourced, and we expect this to be done in a number of months. And as a follow-up to that open sourcing, there will be an SDK to create these cartridges, and associated with that, a lab edition. Now, the lab edition will be an unsupported product. It will be very much like AS7, a product that everybody can contribute to, can run at home, right? So that could be run in your corporate data center, and it's easy migration of your applications as you develop them on your whatever hardware you have, whatever hypervisor you're using, and then migrate these applications out to any cloud that OpenShift is running for production purposes. And that's really the purpose of this lab edition, so facilitate development, right? It comes with the same UI that you see here, most likely, ported to HTML5 at that point.
Okay, and the one question that's come up, and I wonder, I was looking for it while you were speaking there, responding to the first question, and that is, we were building a list of applications live and running on Express or Flex, and kind of the URLs to those applications. Do we have that document out there yet?
I think so. I think so. Let me review that question. I'm not seeing that question actually.
Yeah, it's good. Can you give us examples of real-life applications already using Express?
Oh, yeah. There is actually I don't, because I don't know where the URL is, but we have a showcase page. Maybe that's something that if the person could email to OpenShift@redhat.com and ask for that URL, that would be probably the fastest way.
Yeah, I was looking for it as well. I can't figure out what happened to it. Okay.
No, there was a redesign a week ago, so I'm not up to speed with the redesign.
So one question related to the Flex, and I think Scott's actually typing in an answer, but I'd like you to also address this point, is what is the support for NoSQL solutions or NoSQL technologies out there in Flex?
So Flex comes today with Mongo support, and there is also a Membase and Couchbase, a component to it, a Couchbase cartridge. So you can just select them. You go to the component screen. You select what you want to have, and depending clearly on what you're choosing, you can select different replication patterns and so forth, sharding and the like. So this is always backends that OpenShift manages for you. Of course, you're always free to call out to any other, data backend or web service that you want to.
And when it comes to user management, and I've seen this question before, this is from Klaus. He was asking about security earlier, and I was asking about user management. Is there any kind of role concept, groups or roles?
Yes, in Flex there is. It's not exposed in today's UI. As you know, we are in developer preview mode, so we didn't want to confuse this too much. But yes, the product is built around a hierarchy of roles and organizations, so you can delegate cloud resources to subgroups. For instance, a business owner can delegate to certain teams, certain resource quotas.
Okay, and then a question related to in-memory data grids. This is similar to the NoSQL solution, but do we have the InfiniSpan component? I can't remember if I've seen it. I know we're pushing it there. I don't know if it's there at this moment.
It will be there shortly. It's already there as the foundation for AS7. So as you use AS7, you already use InfiniSpan. It's going to be probably released. I'm not the release manager, but it's probably going to be released within like a month or two's time.
And I would add that I believe Pete already has some content up as video content up on Vimeo. Let's go back and look to see which of those are available right now. So we definitely are getting an in-memory data grid there through our InfiniSpan technology, as Tobias was just saying. It is part of AS7, but it can also be a standalone, independent in-memory data grid as well, and used as a cache.
Right. I think Pete's actually going to do a demo at Java 1, illustrating Flex and InfiniSpan working together.
Okay, and there's one last question that I'll let the two of you guys answer, and you can answer it verbally. Does OpenShift support multi-tenancy and allow to track utilization of different tenants? Monitor, I guess, what those different tenants are doing out there.
Once we get out of developer preview, yes. Internally, it already does that. That's the user management that I was talking about, quotas, and that's all attached to security roles. The use case here is clearly a larger organization with subgroups, managers owning the credit cards, and so forth. Right?
All right, Scott, do you have any input on that one?
Well, I've only worked in the Express piece where it's really just strictly controlled by, your SE Linux settings. So it's really not much under your control there.
But in the case of Express, it's already multi-tenant. You are not necessarily managing the tenants. We are taking care of that for you.
Right. We're basically slicing up an EC2 instance with, SE Linux and RHEL resource constraints to achieve that effect, but you don't have access to editing that at this point. When we get the release out, then you can potentially have control over those settings in your own environment that you don't in the OpenShift environment.
Okay, with that, we're out of time, so thank you very much, Tobias and Scott. You guys, I love the fact that we were able to do deep dive demos and see most of the presentation in demonstration form. There's a list of URLs here on the screen of interest. We encourage you to go check out OpenShift, redhat.com. And please do sign up for a trial account, get on, register with the site, get on Try Express, deploy an application, try Flex, get in there and interact with that user interface that you saw Tobias showing off. And I think you enjoyed the experience, and we're really looking for your feedback at this point. You know, it's a developer preview, and we want to hear about all the things you would like to see and wish to see in this context and in this platform as a service world. And if you have future interest, we can also do deeper dive presentations on this going forward. Just feel free to contact us, and you can contact me personally. Most of you guys have my email address. That's Burr. So that's bsutter@redhat.com or burr.sutter@jboss.com, all sorts of ways to find me. And again, thank you guys very much for your time. Tobias, Scott, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.